Hello and welcome to UK Cinema History. I am your host, Eric Trommater. Today we're going to have a really big show. We'll be discussing 1964's A Hard Day's Night, directed by Richard Lester and starring four guys who got pretty famous, the Beatles. This is actually Yassi Soufi's suggestion, so as our tradition warrants, she'll be hosting. But before I hand over the reins to Yassi, I want to welcome our panel, Sila, Blume, and Yassi Soufi. Thank you for coming. And Yassi, I'm going to mod everybody, and I'm going to hand the reins over to you. This is your episode.
Hi everybody. Yay, I'm so happy for doing this. It's summer. It's you know, it we can like go on and on about like the the themes. Oh, the how like Lester approached fame, the generational gap, oh, the visuals and all that. But what I really loved was that I don't know for like 10 times or I don't know 11 times that I watched this film, I could have just sit back and enjoy it and have fun with it because that joy the magic of this film I think is that Lester brought that youthful joy of these four people and their chemistry and this I don't know, it kind of innocence of the 60s and the beauty of the music and everything. So before anything, I just wanted to say like this to me this movie is pure joy. Before it's not about the analysis, it's not about anything. It's just for perfect midsummer movie.
And this film, it did rank number 89 on the BFI's 1999 list of the top 100 films of all time. But it's a film I think is actually surprisingly underrated, really, over the years. I think a lot of that has to do with the popularity of the Beatles. I think some of it also has to do with how not as good the other Beatles films were, and uh, but we'll get into its long term ramifications. But I did want to start with one of my favorite Richard Lester lines because he was called the grandfather of MTV, and he said that he demanded a blood test because he didn't want to take credit for it, because or as he put it, blame. I also want to welcome Hillary to the stage. Hillary, thank you, and I really want to thank you for your efforts on the social media site formerly known as Twitter the other day to really promote our podcast. We appreciate you.
I love you guys, of course.
Well, yeah, it's completely mutual.
Well,
Okay,
I
Yazzie.
love Yazzie just a little bit more, though. I mean, just wanted to point that out.
Well,
And
so do I. I don't blame you.
it's
So
it's mutual. But it's like love is in the air. It's just like all the love songs in this movie.
all you need is love. Not in this movie. And the only person we haven't heard from is Sila before we turn it over to Yazzie. Sila, hello, and how are you?
Hello, everyone. Hillary, Yassi, Eric, Omar, and I cannot read that. Oh, Jason. I think that's Jason. Yes, I am very, very happy. Am I to give the opening statements now or just to say hello?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Well, as you well know, music is a very important thing to me. So I see the movie in part as a cinema piece, but with a very interesting weight on the music, which I guess is supposed to be. I was very impressed with this film. I had never seen it before. I saw it a couple of days ago and finished watching it for the second time a few minutes ago. I must say that I have never been a Beatles fan. I respect their music. I respect their talent. I think they did a lot of innovation in the 60s with their ideas, lyrics, and of course the composition ideas. I've had discussions in Europe and in the United States for decades about it's a common discussion that comes up again and again. Who was the best guitarist? Who was the best drummer? Who was the best anything? These guys never ever come up. They are never listed amongst the best single musicians. But to what Yassi was saying, I think the chemistry they had and they show in this film, and also the chemistry between them and Lester to make this film the way they did it, I think is absolutely exceptional. And I'm very glad about the sound quality of the film, that you have the impression, or I got the impression, the music performances are done with the studio quality, not this concert quality that loses a little bit of the detail of the original songs and the people screaming and the girls doing more than screaming. But I really, really enjoyed this film. I think the the idea to I think I read somewhere also to support my impression. The script was actually open. It was not strict. I get the impression all along the film that there's nothing scripted. Everything just happens as it happens, with the humor of the Beatles, with the humor put in by Lester from different scenes and different persons. I just found this is a very, 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 very good film for the music, for the comedy, for the historical references to the mods and to the rockers, to the British type of life, to the conflict between classes that comes up and again and again and again with the man in the train, and in different situations we keep getting this reference to the classicism in England, to the modern way, the modern culture conflicting with the establishment. It's such a great film, but all in all, very, very well done, but fun. Entertainment, very high quality entertainment. I'm quite impressed with this film.
Yazzie, you're in charge.
Hillary, give us your first impression of this magical movie.
So the cinematography on it at the time was very avant-garde. It was stuff that kids were doing in college. It's stuff that kids were doing in film school. It's not stuff that you were seeing on the big screen. It was filmed very quickly. Um, Most of the lines in it are improvised. Uh, and even the Hard Day's Night was something that Ringo had said to a disc jockey once. Um, it was just one of those off the cuff things that they just sat around and just kind of did what they did, which is be silly and whatnot. It is what later influenced the Monkees, of course, which I liked better than the Beatles. Don't tell my father. My father is a die-hard Beatles fan, like die-hard. He even named my sister. Her middle name is Michelle from the song "My Michelle" by the Beatles. It's a Hard Day's Night is. I don't think it's their best, but it is their. I think it isn't it. I think it is their like best selling or best made the most money out of all. I don't remember. It was yeah, no, I think this is the one that made the most. Um, I saw a what is it called when they fix up all the um they go through and fix the color and they fix everything and remaster.
Restoration.
Thank you. I saw and I didn't like it as much. I like the graininess. I like the black and white. I like the I same reason I listen to vinyl records. I like the pops and the scratches, and I just kind of didn't really like the whole Technicolor of it. Didn't bode well with me. But this is a movie that was set in a time where the Beatles were really young. I'm gonna without looking it up, just off the top of your head, how old do you think the Beatles were in this?
22.
Yazzie?
John was 24.
Actually, no. John was. I
Yeah,
think.
they were.
Good.
Yeah, yeah,
Go-
they were. It wasn't their. They were so young. It wasn't their peak of their career. If that's what you're going to. So yeah, I don't know why you want to talk about their age. So,
Oh, because when I
but
look, okay, I
yeah, go
guess.
ahead.
Oh no,
Yeah, yeah, go
so
ahead.
yeah, no. Ringo and John were 23. Paul was 22. No, he's 21 during the filming of the movie, and George was 21. And I guess because as a kid watching it, these are people that are so much older than me. But as an adult, these are some actually really good lines that are coming from kids. Young kids, pretty much. And the movie was just it captured an innocence as well as the strife that was going on in the world around us at that time. And it was before everything really went hardcore with Vietnam and everything else. Like it was just an innocence and a randomness and just silliness that really drew you into the band and made you want to hang out with them. It made you want to be their best friend. You wanted to go, you know, exploring with them. You wanted to hang out with that old dude. What's his face? God, I can't remember his name. I mean, the Ringo's dad character. I mean, you wanted to be part of that world, and it was because
Mr.
it was.
McCartney.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, it was just better. It was just a better world than whatever you were going through at that moment, and that holds true today. You could still watch
He's
that
very
movie.
clean. Very clean.
Yeah.
that was a great reference with the clean. Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Hillary. Go ahead.
No, no, no. It was hilarious. Hilarious.
No, the
Um,
the, the thing with the clean. I'm sure
with
that
the yeah.
I'm sure most of you know about this, but I discovered that the clean references to two things. He did this. He did a show before this. He was famous as a comedian, and
Steptoe
Steptoe.
and Son.
Yes, yes, and this is the original idea to Samson and Son in the United States. And he was a dirty old man. So, and the Beatles were also considered to be very clean. So they keep pounding on this clean to as a contrast.
Yeah, go ahead, Hillary.
Oops, sorry. I didn't know that. I didn't know that this was the precursor to Sanford and Son. That's kind of cool. Very cool, actually. Um, yeah. So no, it just this. I had this movie poster when I was in, I think, third grade, well into high school. It was a really, really nice framed movie poster that my dad got somewhere. I don't know, but probably at a garage sale or something. But yeah, it hung in my room for years and years, and I really wish I still had it because it was an original and it was so beautiful. Um, I don't know. I just have good memories of this movie. It's one of the few times that I spent time sitting on the couch with my dad, watching it on VHS, and him telling me the stories of when he discovered the Beatles, and he was so animated. My dad was a workaholic, and he was never in a good mood. He never had fun. Didn't teach me to play baseball. We never had fun together. It was dad comes home from work, everybody shut up, let him relax, let him unwind. And one of the few really good memories I have is watching this movie, sitting in the living room, and just how animated and how happy he was, and the stories and telling me what these different places, what the different landscapes and what the different landmarks and all that are, and it's just a good feeling, and I'm getting all teary eyed right now just even thinking about it because this movie, it was a uniter. It was something that brings people together. And even today, we can talk about it, and everybody's got a favorite scene. Everyone's got a favorite Beatle. Well, except, sorry, you just said you didn't like the Beatles that much, so. But even still, I'm sure you still have a favorite Beatle, right?
Well,
Yeah,
it's not that I didn't like them. They were just never my favorite. I would never play their music on my own. Um, I really cannot say I have a favorite
actually,
one.
I
To
was
me,
gonna ask.
they function as a team.
Mine would be the 1973 yellow model, the one that had the one that had the four on the floor, because that actually had the turbo engine. That was the first one that they used the turbo on, so you could get almost up to 60 miles an hour with the wind behind you.
Well, when it comes to
Eric,
when
sorry,
once
Eric, I have a question. No, go ahead, Sila. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I just wanted to say when it comes to the music, especially considering what they did afterwards. For me, the favorite would be McCartney because I think he did very good material with with Wings. I think that music was very very good. A little bit different, a little bit similar, but quite good.
I don't
John
think
Lennon.
anyone's ever said that before.
For me, John Lennon was too spiritual with Yoko Ono and too new age. That was for me a little bit too over the top.
See, I don't get the whole hippie thing with John Lennon. I think he's an asshole. I think he's an egocentric narcissist. And every time people are like, "Oh, he was so about love and happiness," I'm like, "Yeah, no." Read a little bit further. No, he wasn't. But I agree. I think Paul McCartney is. I really genuinely think he's one of the best guitar players of that entire century. I really do. Paul McCartney is a brilliant guitar player. He can pick something up and just by ear. I mean, I don't know everything though. I mean, he played so many instruments, and yeah, a lot of talent there. I like
He,
Ringo.
he, he played bass for the Beatles, not guitar.
Bass is a guitar.
John Lennon was a rhythm guitarist,
All
and
right, Eric. All right, be nice, be
But no,
nice.
no, but
I
he is a
can't.
great
That's
guitar
not my
player.
job to be nice.
Regardless if he played bass for them or not, he is a great guitar player. Have you ever heard him play? I mean, he can do guitar, he can do piano, he can do like almost he can pick up almost any instrument and like immediately know how. I don't know. It's just I cannot play an instrument. In all my years in the music industry, I can't play an instrument. Not a single one of them. And I'm always blown away by people who can just pick something up and just do it. It's amazing.
You would like me.
I love you. I think you're amazing. And your music is great too. So you've got a voice. I'll tell you what.
Hey, Scylla, quick musical question before we get back to Hillary. The opening chord of the song "A Hard Day's Night." Now, I on piano always play that as a G7 with sustained 4, and I get that wow. But I have a friend who actually knocks his guitar out of tune and can just play a regular G, and it sounds even better. It sounds even closer to it. How do you think they achieved that chord?
You people like to put me in this music genius positions. I I must
I'm only
confess at
asking you
this.
to theorize. I gave my theory, that's all.
Well, I will confess something that probably Clubhouse has never heard about me. I have been playing since I was 8, actually younger than that, and singing even before that on stage, but I never learned to write music. So I really, if you put some music sheet in front of me, I would have a very difficult time doing it. When I took my organ lessons, I would listen to my teacher play and then I would repeat what he did. And he
You
thought I
just
was
said
learning.
you don't know why we call you a genius, and then you
Nah,
answered
nah,
your
nah.
own question.
It's just a talent. It's not a genius. It's just, yeah, yeah. It could happen to anybody. I'm sorry,
No,
really.
it can't, and it doesn't. I mean, it really doesn't. You don't give yourself enough credit, my friend. That's a very rare talent and a beautiful one. I'm envious.
But to your question, I really I remember I have that sound in my head right now. I think they did a lot of a particular form of distortion for for that time. And so it's not just the chord that they're playing, but what they did with the guitar sound. And I know they did a lot with sound. I think somewhere I read many years ago that we don't know most of their voices because they were always treated. So they did a lot of technological things that in those days were not necessarily common, but it was very Beatles-like to work with very particular details.
I love that you brought that up because their experimentation in the studio is something that most bands that have been signed that are on a label don't ever get to do. I mean, the
Correct.
Beatles were just kind of given a carte blanche there,
Yeah.
and they came up with some really awful stuff, but also some the whole White Album, just the entire White Album. And I know I'm being cliche, and I don't care. I like the Pixies Doolittle too. So what's up? But the entire White Album, I'm just as someone, who's into sound engineering, I love it. I love every single thing that they did there, even Revolution Number 9, because nobody did it. And they got in there and said, "Let's do it." And they did. And it was brilliant.
I'm a Rubber Soul man myself. How about you, Yassi? What's your favorite Beatles album?
Oh, are we already there? That was my final question that I wanted to ask everybody. That what is your favorite album? What is your favorite song?
Well, Hillary
And
brought it up. So
yeah,
I
so
just,
Oh
I
no, I
mean,
said I love
might
the
have.
White Album.
my
My favorite album is not the White Album.
so can
Well,
before anything, can you please invite Jason from the audience up, because he was one of our favorites in understanding movies rooms. He was the one that brought Cogonada to our attention. So,
he has been invited.
oh, thank you. So yeah, my favorite Beatles album is Abbey Road. My favorite song is I Want You So Bad, She's So Heavy.
Oh my god, that is the only song my son knows how to play, and he's been singing that song since he was 5. And I was always like, "You are gonna grow up and be so embarrassed with these videos someday when you realize what this song's about." But that is so funny you just said that. I'll send you the
I
videos. You're gonna love it.
please do that, please. I love that song. And I think that song is kind of like the beginning of all that grunge. It's my favorite genre in like alternative music. The way that the rhythm changes in the song. So I think we get to that later at the end. But I have a question for but before I say hi to Jason, I have a question for Eric. Eric, are you a mod or a rocker?
I'm a mocker.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Hey,
If
speaking
you
of
do not
that
post
line,
that,
Yeah.
we cannot be friends
speaking
anymore.
of that line, I did want to correct something. Almost all of the dialogue in this film was actually scripted by Alan Owen. The improv scenes are things like the helicopter that's supposed to be from uh, John's point of view, the playing around, the "Can't Buy Me Love" scene, and the Beatles running around, the whole Keystone Cops bit, that bit where, but even a lot of those bits, like the bit where the fellow's trying to steal the car and the cops are chasing and they think it's his car, so they say follow those four, and the car thief has to follow because he's got the police. All of that stuff was scripted. So here are your improv scenes. The one I just mentioned, the press conference, all of those answers were it was basically, it's a press conference where the Beatles give their normal answers that they would at a press conference, is all that it says in the screenplay. The other dialogue scene that's improv is when the tailor is holding out the measuring tape, and John cuts it with a pair of scissors. I now declare this bridge open, which that was invented on the scene simply because the actual tailor for the film was working, and Lester thought, oh, he's got pretty good screen presence. We should work up a bit with him. And it was funny because that actually took 15 takes because John kept deliberately screwing up the line. So he would say things like, I finally, I declare this battleship to be to be open. I declare that, and everyone would laugh for a while. Okay, let's retake it. And finally, luckily they redubbed all of the dialogue in this film because they never properly got a good visual take with John actually not screwing up the line, and so the final line is I finally I declare this bodice open, which bodice is an upper garment for women, and it had John redub it in the studio, but all the other dialogue. Um, Owen Allen, Alan Owen. He spells it weird, Alun, but gathered by spending 3 days with the Beatles and to write the screenplay, and they really stuck to that dialogue. If you actually read the screenplay, it's only about 28 pages long because that's how little dialogue there is in it, and the scenes that are meant for improvisation are all Beatles go out to a field and do Beatley stuff, or the opening shot of them getting chased when I think isn't it George who falls down and hurts his wrist? Well, he actually literally did fall down and hurt his wrist, and that is John laughing uncontrollably. That was an improv scene. So, all right, moving back to Yazzie. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Yeah, of course. And something like the producer, Walter Shanson, his voice is Eric. It's like I was hearing your voice, so similar to yours. Just I put the documentary in the chat, so please go watch it and tell me if you have the same feeling. So I want to welcome Jason. Like, it's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a while. Yeah, the first time I watched this film was I was probably about 15, and it. I just remember thinking just how the banter between them was just like nothing else, and that's what kind of stuck with me the most was just how easy they were with the jokes and the sort of subtle British humor that was kind of intended for a lot of sort of jokes that you kind of had to be in on, but they'd never let you in, kind of thing. But but if you knew, you knew, kind of situation. I like Help actually a lot better than this film. Funny enough, I don't know. I think it's just it was, I mean, it was color and those kinds of things, um, but I just like the sort of uh, the time. Like this film felt a little like older. I mean, it's interesting that it's in black and white because it was kind of the transition year, but and I was a huge fan of the Goons and Peter Sellers and those guys, and so like I see a lot of that humor pass here, but I also see a little bit of like Truffaut, like Jules and Jim or something, right? Like you see a lot of the dance scenes or the kind of cut scenes and that kind of fun feels like he was watching a lot of the French films as well. Um, yeah, I know the Help. It's funny that you're the horror that you have there, Eric, but this is a much more pure film of their sort of comedy, so I get it. And there's another, I think the other thing he did before this um, movie, I forget what the hell that one was called, but that was another one that was actually very similar. A lot of the same tropes, a lot of the same cut ups and things that he was doing in this one. It also reminds me of the
You
Magic.
talking about the Mouse on the Moon, or are you talking about the short he made, the running, jumping, standing still film?
Yeah, Running Jumpy Staying Still. Yeah. Um, you can kind of see where he got a lot of the ideas for this one. The sort of cut scenes where they're being silly and goofing off. Um, that's for sure. So that was another interesting thing is to see like how close those two were in my sort of view of that was kind of the experimental version of what he was doing here. Um, yeah, that's a lot. That's all I kind of really have to say. I mean, the music. This wasn't my favorite album. I mean, I think one of my first albums as a kid was my dad's version of what the hell was it? The Sergeant Pepper's, and so Sergeant Pepper's was such a big deal for me because the George Martin side of it was the most interesting of all the things, because he was always introducing these sort of weird instruments and weird mixing techniques and weird, as new things were coming out, like 2-track tape and things, he was playing around with a lot of that stuff. And so I think my sentiment immediately went to, like, how were these damn noises made and what world they are painting, like this massive sort of abstract world they're painting with sound. And the sort of general Beatles music was like, it's perfectly fine, but it didn't really resonate with me in the same way that something like Sergeant Pepper's did. So this movie kind of lacked that a bit. And then the other one, it was with George getting into help was with George getting into sitar, and a lot of other influences were coming in, and it was just kind of interesting to see. And the Guru thing was very popular, so it was funny that they were kind of making fun of all that, I think. And then so it's just also interesting to see what other movies were out at the same time. Like Strangelove dropped the same year, and I can only imagine how sort of epic that film was relative to something like this, which is probably much smaller. Also, it's the year that the Beatles came to America, I think, 63, 64. So it probably got a lot more attention than it would have had that not happened. Yeah, it's pretty chill film. I mean, there's not a lot going on in it. Mostly, it's just the Beatles kind of backstage, kind of running around doing their thing.
But you mentioned something really interesting, that you said a lot of the other Beatles movies we see in this one. Even at the beginning, we hear that John, like when they're in the casino playing no, 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 when they're in the train playing
Yeah.
cards, John says, like, he's Ringo, he's wearing his lucky ring, and then we know that what happens in Help with that
Yeah.
lucky ring,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and also all these this sense of group, this friendship amongst them, that I'm going to talk about it later, that how it's how uh Richard Lester's directorial approach to this movie matters. And if it wasn't Richard Lester, if it wasn't kind of a director with a vision of comedy, or like music, or the time that the movie, like they were making the movie, this movie could have easily been like Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, because this is the same thing.
Mhm.
This is a group of famous people running, being slave to their fame, running away from fans. This is like, I told Eric, like, to me, that this is like, Stardust Memories. This is like Fellini's 8.5. The way that those movies approach fame,
Mm.
and that's the same thing here. But there's this, just like what Eric was saying, this innocence, this improvisation, and a good script, and a director that knows how to, deal with a group of young, famous. That's why, Hillary, I asked you that. Why are you asking the question of age? Because that that shows that Lester really knew what he was doing with that very good script. Because it's the very minimalistic beginning, like very short, sentences, just like witty. Everyone has this short, and that claustrophobia. And then we get to like the middle of the movie, and then we have that breakout scene that, of course, we're going to get to that and talk about that later. But all that, I think, and going back to what you were saying, Jason, this, uh, what, how this movie is, how it's impactful, not just for this group and their musical career, their personas that it creates, you know, for their, other movies that like in future, but also generally in this genre of kind of mockumentary of, you know, uh, this type of rock musical of sort that I think, Eric, you're going to talk about it, like what Andrew Saris said, what Roger Ebert said. I put a link in the chat that is like the best of all the good reviews about this film. And what has been said about this film really amazes me, that they said like, oh, this is the Citizen Kane of musicals, and next to, I really like that the movie is not treated as a goofy, you know, a bunch of young kids. The movie has its merit, and its visual artistic value that's is still appealing today, like, and the comedy of it's not getting old. And I think that's why we see a lot of it later in other uh Beatles movies.
Yeah, it has a weight. I mean, that's the thing, is it does have a weight, and it does have a sort of a certain sort of pedigree of filmmaking. The other thing that it also reminded me of, just because I was a huge Marx Brothers fan as a kid, and so that sort of quick banter between those guys and the way that they could, fire shots and keep going. This had that same feeling to me. So I think it was not only, I think what the appeal for me was that it had that same exact feel of those movies, but it was a much more modern group of people who I could, understand sort of in my time, and it just felt kind of an update to those kinds of things, which I really love. Sort of the Buster Keaton as well. So it was another kind of like the falls and the pratfalls and things like that are very much like a Keaton film as well, and a little bit of Jacques Tati is included.
Oh,
I
absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry, Sila. Like that, like for instance, that disappearance on the bathtub scene. It's I know that John is kind of wanted to be the Groucho Marx of this film, but to me, uh, all of them are kind of like Harpo. Maybe because of the very minimal dialogues that all of them have, but yeah, but that absolutely, it's so like that absurd comedy of Marx Brothers. Sorry, Sila, go ahead.
Yeah, go
no,
ahead,
I
Sila.
no, I just wanted to make an observation that for me is extremely important. When we talk about their ages, being 20, 21, 24, the first of all, the 60s in opera, in jazz, in blues, in soul, in rock was a very, very powerful period, which means the people that were being formed as individuals in those times, which were not above 35, they were more like between 17 and 30, they had an incredible life they were growing into and learning and observing and digesting what was going on. And if I think of many musicians in many fields of music, being being a musician as part of Beatles, writing those songs, which were mostly Lennon and McCartney, as far as we know, they were very, very powerful. They were the lyrics, the chord changes were sometimes quite unique, quite different, quite new. My point is, in terms of years, we might think they were young, but I think that the power, the energy, the desire, and the need to do something new, which is basically what any poet or any painter or any composer or guitar player is trying to do, is create something and not replicate something. So we're looking at people who are young, but in terms of their ability to digest, observe, and produce something from that, they were extremely, extremely talented. So I understand the point of the age, but I think that for the most part, an individual will be, if they're talented, if they're open, if they have the right surroundings to produce anything creative or even scientifically, those are the years when you really, really produce probably the best material you can ever produce.
I also want to kind of follow up on Jason's point about the influence of the French New Wave on this film, and it is there, but the fact of the matter is, the British New Wave, the free cinema movement, had been doing this since 1955. And one of the reasons we scheduled next week, The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner, is so that you can see that before this, that this was, that this use of things like jump cuts, the use of the freeze frames, the silent style uh, undercranking of the film to speed it up, and then in that helicopter scene where where the battery was actually dying on the camera, and so you actually got both slow motion and speeded up motion in the exact same frame. Those type of things, some guys named Tony Richardson, Carl Rice, and of course, our Lord and Savior Lindsay Anderson, may God preserve him forever, had been doing it since 1955 in England, long, back when names like Godard and Truffaut were still writing for Cahiers de Cinema. So it is. Lester was actually working on a very English tradition. He had come from America when he was 22 years old. Speaking of, to tie into Sila's point, in 1955 from American television, and he was picked up by Peter Sellers and the Goons, and he had been experimenting with these things on television. Matter of fact, the Beatles' first television appearance was on the Goons show. Which Yazzie, you've got that video if you want to link it into, if you can find it and link it into the chat, where Peter Sellers is doing Richard the Third. Richard Lester directed that scene, and so he had been working with the Goons not only on radio but on it wasn't called the Goons television show because the Goons was BBC on radio. It was, I think, called Don't Adjust Your Set because it was on ITV and they couldn't copyright the two names, but it was the Goons show basically on television. And that anarchic, surreal humor all came really from that British tradition. Now you say, well, Lester was an American. He lived 60 years of his life in Britain and 22 years of his life in the United States. So what would you call him? But I think it was actually more of a very deeply British tradition. Now, were they influenced by watching films like Breathless, Jules and Jim, and 400 Blows? Absolutely, but all films were, I mean, even William Wyler, the stodgy director of films like Ben-Hur, when he made The Collector, used new wave techniques and handheld cameras and things like that. But it wasn't an exclusively French experiment, and to say that it didn't travel across the English Channel, that the free cinema stuff like the documentaries like Every Day But Sunday and Mama Won't Allow, those played at Cannes, those played at the film festivals, and those were very influential on the Cahiers du Cinema people. So I think I think it was more of a cultural exchange of ideas between the two countries, as opposed to this idea that, like the Beatles, this kind of what became the swinging 60s cinema was re-imported, like the Beatles re-imported rock and roll. and a matter of fact, Richardson's studio would produce Lester's next film, The Knack and How to Get It, which won Cannes Film Festival, and Woodfall Studios, and the studio that and Tom Jones are their two biggest hits. As a matter of fact, the reason why they were able to stay in business despite losing so much money on the kitchen sink dramas that we cover so much and love so much is basically because of the profits of those two films. And I'm not the biggest fan of Tom Jones, but it is I mean, it won the Oscar for Best Picture. Watch Tom Jones next to this. Or next week's film, also directed by Tony Richardson, Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner. And you'll see those techniques years before Lester did. So sorry to interrupt, but that was, I needed to get that off my
No, no,
chest.
I agree. I like the Knack a lot as well. It's one of my favorites of that era as well. I'm also curious just if Pete and Dud were somehow influenced on a lot of this because they were kind of doing a little bit of this sort of humor style at the time, though they were only, I think, on TV, still not in many movies. Pete,
Unfortunately, most of that show you can't find because the BBC never kept copies of it. So I don't know how much of that influence there was visually, because there's just not a lot of it existent. Because they literally recorded over the tapes because they wanted to save money on new tapes. That's
yeah, I
how
heard that.
important it is.
Yeah.
But about this cinema verite, Eric, when we were talking about our Lord Savior Lindsay Anderson, if you remember, we said that how much he was influenced by Jean Vigo, Zéro de Conduit, à propos de Nice, and all that. So to go back to what
Well,
Jason, the
but he
point
was
that
just
Jason
as
was making.
influenced. He was just as influenced by John Ford and Stagecoach, and that's where he got the idea for those rapid edits. Was from watching John Ford and Stagecoach. So, like I say, there's a cross pollination because film, as we've said, is an international language.
The same thing must be said about music. For my taste and my experience with music, the number one culture or country when it comes to pop music has always been England. For me, they're number one, and nobody comes close at all. Rolling Stones, the Beatles, David Bowie, Roxy Music, go down the line. For me, that's the essence of pop music, at least when it comes to rock. However, any of these guys, David Bowie, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, they all make references to the music they liked from the United States. So it keeps going back and forth without this combination of what is in the essence of the English culture, which they tend to use a lot. What's his name? Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull, Gentle Giant, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. They all make always Queen. They always make references to the English history, to their kings, to their queens. That's part of their DNA always in pop music. So this cross pollination, for me, in music has been extremely strong.
Of course. So something, because I want also Hillary, bring Hillary to the conversation. And you mentioned Sila. You mentioned that how important the music is. Of course, like this movie is all about music. So I think one of the most important things that we have to talk about is, and I said it, that okay, so this is a movie about Beatles. This is the movie that shaped their personas. This is the movie that all these, the Beatles that we know today is shaped in this movie, created in this movie. So, but you know, it, it is presented to us through these music videos, music style of Lester, as I mentioned before. So something that I found really interesting was that how Lester approached these characters, each of the Beatles individually and in a group. Like how happy we see them when they're together playing music. And every time that they're going to play a number, they start with like five, six, seven, eight. So just like, a music video.
Yeah,
And
that's what I was gonna
the
say. Yeah,
yeah, and the
it
way
feels like the
that
first.
they
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. And the way that they respond to each other. It's not like, because we see a lot of videos like that lip syncing at Sullivan and, monkeys, so many like groups that at the time, but we don't see them kind of interact with each other, look at each other. That kind of jazzy improvisation that, the musicians look at each other, respond to each other. I think that sense of friendship, a music group with harmony, was something that Lester depicted so beautifully. And that's the winning thing. That's why, like what Hillary was talking about, that when she was a kid looking at this movie, they were like older, but now she is older than the Beatles in the movie, but still the comedy is appealing. The characters are compelling. I think because they bring this sense of, togetherness and friendship through this artistic camera, and the theme of friendship and harmony and music and love. And so, I don't want to make it so but that that historical, that, and also represent the 60s, the era, that zeitgeist that everyone used. This movie captures that zeitgeist perfectly.
Can I make a hyper technical point?
Uh-oh.
No, no. We
Um,
love that. I love that. So go ahead, please.
the reason Lester was able to capture that was because he was using a multi-camera setup. So he had more than one camera on the scene, and allowed his editor to be able to cut between the reaction scenes and things like that. Yeah, we discussed a film called Last Holiday, and we talked about how very good film, but kind of it felt a little shoddy, even though it was done on a larger budget than this. And the reason why is because it was a single setup, one camera setup. But Lester has three cameras on them in that small little cage, the luggage department on the train. He has six cameras rolling during the finale when they're playing, but he's always got at least three cameras going at all times, and so you can cut to Paul's reaction because you have it on film, because you don't have to. And when you talk about an improvisational style, what that also allows for improvisation in the directing. And I go back to the opening train sequence, and you see Paul kind of playing with the palms of his hands, and that's a cutaway. Well, that's something we never would have gotten out of another film, because it's something that you just would have caught. Or wouldn't have been caught if you had just assigned a single cameraman to it. But anyway, that was my hyper technical point. And
So I have a
Vern
quick
is here,
question.
so I'll be
So
quiet.
Oh, no, 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 Eric, now that
mm.
you mentioned the camera work, so please continue. Tell us one thing about that scene that they use that swing to take that 360-degree around Paul McCartney, and what happened. with that, and also how the use of handheld camera kind of added to that, this sense of documentary-esque, mockumentary of the film. And yeah, please, like, now that we are in the technical aspect, let's talk about all the.
I did want to say one thing that I thought was also interesting quickly, was that besides being like kind of the first music video, it was kind of the first time that someone went all out on like a big budget sort of absurdist comedy film, which I think opened the gateway for so many films afterwards, to be successful. The other thing is just Norman McLaren. I don't know if you guys know the Canadian, sort of art director, film director kind of thing. A lot of I'm curious if this might have also had influences. A lot of his little short things that he made were very similar to the sort of comedy bits here. So and it feels very close to that same style. So I imagine they also had that a little bit of that influence going on, because he's been making those things quite earlier than this film was made. That's about it, really.
Well, we can come back to the technical points, because I want to I wanted to welcome Vern to the stage. Vernon, we haven't heard from you in a very long time, and it's very good to see you.
I love how when I walk into the room, you immediately think I have to shut up because Vern is here. But I'm
I
just
know
here
how
to
much you
listen.
love it when I interrupt you, like now.
Yeah, I took. So I don't know. I still haven't watched the film, so I'm not going to have much to say. But I will say, um, I grew up knowing lots of the Beatles, like top 40 hits, and never actually being a fan, because it's just so infectious. And I'm a very melancholy fella, so it was always problematic when I would, find myself singing an upbeat tune. And I actually took, for my college graduation requirements, it took me 23 years to get my undergrad degree. And in my last semester, I had to take like a humanities class. And the professor who taught it, he spent half the year, uh, I think half his lectures were about the Beatles. Like he kind of used it as kind of a way to explain like language and literature and like philosophical concepts. And, it's been like a dozen years since I've taken that class. But I really do enjoy listening to people talk about the Beatles because, their influence is just so profound. And they, I never understood why all these young girls would just kind of scream hysterically. Like they created like that kind of phenomena, like people just screaming out of pure joy. And so I love hearing people recount their experiences. So I'm just going to be quiet and let you guys carry on.
I dropped one of McLaren's films from 1962 in the chat there, just to see kind of what the reference point I'm making is.
Thank you.
Well, talking about all these girls screaming and crying around the Beatles, I think that has never happened to Beyonce.
Wow, that's true.
Well, my favorite line from the Who's Quadrophenia is the ushers are sniffing eau de cologne, and that was a Beatles reference because the girls at their concerts couldn't control themselves because they were just so overjoyed, and they would pee themselves, and the concert would smell like piss, and the only way they could get rid of the smell was by drowning it out with eau de cologne. And so the ushers would come out smelling like pee and eau de cologne every day.
But actually, what Vern was saying, that he can't understand that why, like, girls were screaming and everything. This is what this movie is all about. I think it's kind of a criticism to the way that we approach the stardom, and you know how, especially during that press conference scene, that says, like, the way that we create this stardom, and we think that these are not, real people. We create an image, and we separate these kind of celebrities, these stars from the, the way that we idolize them, I think. And the way that this movie, approaches this fame in a very satiric way and exaggerate, that those screaming that you see, that what Jason was saying, that we kind of see uh this music video aspect that we see for the first time here, I think that exaggeration and this public reaction kind of, this frenzy of sort is is a commentary to the public, to the audience. And also the media kind of create the stereotype of these stars, the way the journalists, in a very shallow way, cover the life of the celebrities, or sometimes, very well portrayed at the end of the film, through that 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 thief is stealing the car, but the whole gang of the police. Eric, what do they call them? They had a name for. They say something that Manchester, that Liverpool uh, slang for the cops. What do they call them? They had a name for them. I don't know. It's a Liverpool thing, or it's something that they use in the film. Anyway, so yeah, the whole, you know, all of them, like almost 20 policemen, they were chasing the Beatles while this guy was stealing the car, and no one were paying attention to him. So again, that, you know this uh the way that we forget and we dehumanize these celebrities, or we exaggerate and kind of create these idols, and we pay too much attention to them, or sometimes we neglect their human aspect, their human character. We wanted them to be those image that we create for ourselves.
Well, imagine 1,000 Daniels showing up at the airport to greet Michelangelo Antonioni back in 1964, Vern, and I think you get an idea of what it would be like for the Beatles.
Or Elvis.
There's another two things that I wanted to mention. In terms of improvisation, in my perception, the Beatles are or were one of those few groups, I would say perhaps, where I don't see an element of improvisation. They were very tight, not only playing together, but their music does not really allow improvisation. That the way they compose music, in my understanding of music, it doesn't really. It's not open. That's not their thing. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I find in the film there's an interesting, perhaps dilemma or a verge where they find themselves in. One is with this precision that they worked with when they composed and then they would play together. The songs are very well timed. Everything is, and there, I just don't see improvisation there. So everything is very tight. They're, with this mentality, they're approaching 4 years after they started playing together in this constellation. They become very famous. I think in just a few months before this film, they had been at Ed Sullivan. So that's what really made them explode. But when you see, I think it was Ringo Starr, he's playing around with his camera and takes pictures of his milk bottles, and then two girls begin to follow him. So he goes into this secondhand store and comes out dressed so they don't recognize him. And then he walks by a girl who does not recognize him, and he wants to test it. He just wants to see, do you recognize me? And she didn't. She cursed at him by being too short and things like that. So I think in the film you see a lot of the essence of the film is their dedication to playing music, but they're not really into being big idols. At least not at that point. Maybe five years later. But I think I don't think they were really going for I'm famous now. They were just on one side playing very precise music, and on the other hand they were just playing around. And the film, to me, is very much about this combination of being famous and being chased, but actually all we want to do is play music.
Yeah, I mean, they were just coming off that Hamburg thing. I mean, so they were really just playing very, very tight covers, and so that I think that's where they sort of got that ability to just pick up anything and go with it. Um, to add to that,
Well, and if you ever either watch on YouTube or listen to the live album that they did at Shea Stadium, John's guitar is out of tune because it is so loud in the stadium that he couldn't hear to tune it. And that's why they gave up touring, because they realized nobody in that crowd was actually listening to them. And we discussed this in our Pink Floyd The Wall episode, but the but the Beatles were really the first to really kind of just say, you know what, we're not going to tour, we're just going to focus on the studio, because they couldn't control their environment. And uh, to Sila's points, because they were built on these what are called click tracks, where they were playing along with special effects, or later they would use like the Moog synthesizer and things like that. Live performances were just beyond them. Beyond the technology of the time for them, and they gave up literally millions and millions of dollars to focus on just working on their songs in the studios, where they were only making 15 cents per album that sold. Now tons and tons of albums sold, and Paul McCartney is a billionaire, so but uh, it was because they didn't have the control that they wanted, over their chosen medium, that they gave up touring.
did you guys record the Wall session here? I didn't actually hear that one, but I love those guys, and that movie was one of my
Yeah, we did it. We
favorite.
did Tommy and the Wall as one episode. It was
Oh, wow.
Tommy versus the
Yeah.
Wall. Ken Russell is probably only film that will ever be done in UK cinema history with Ken Russell.
We can also redo that Pink Floyd Tommy episode, just like we did the Caravaggio. By the way, uh, that would be interesting. So a few points
Maybe on the
now that
1 year anniversary, Yazzie.
oh yeah, the anniversary. So Jason, put that in your calendar. We're gonna redo that episode just for you because of for your
That'd be fun.
comeback.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Cool.
Yeah. And also, Vern, you wanted to, and Sila, back then you weren't a part of UK cinema, and Hillary and everybody. So, anyway, a few things that I don't want to miss. We have to go back to the technical points and the cinematography and the editing, because Sila mentioned about the pace of the film. And I think that's it's genius, and it happened through the editing, and but editing had a crucial role for this fast pace of the film, and to show, especially like from the beginning till I said right in the middle of the film, when that breakout scene that they through the fire escape, and they finally get out of that claustrophobia, and the way that editing changes and the pace of the film changes after that, and uh and also the I said, I think the script also, Sila was talking about that he couldn't see the improvisation because he found the movie so structured, just like Beatles music. And I think that's a very fascinating point, um, because, the movie is kind of depend on this pseudo documentary black and white style and this chaotic aspect to emphasize on the chaotic aspect of fame. So I think that shows the power of these. Vern was saying that like why this was this Beatles mania. So you see, they were so uh they knew what they were doing with their music, and their music is so powerful that despite this all this effort of the filmmaker to create this chaos and this rebel aspect and this breakout, each of these characters find their way out of this, closed uh, kind of jail of fame. uh, the chains, the restrictions of fame, but still, it's like music plays this crucial role to show, their talent and the way that like they find their liberation through music. And I think that's so beautiful. And that's why, like, someone like Sila finds this very structured. And I think that's so beautiful, and also adds to the uh, absurdity, to the absurd comic aspect of the film. You know,
And keep in mind, this was done on a budget that was £200,000, which was less than it cost to record their previous album. And so this structure was had to be set ahead of time, because everything was not only in terms of a limitation of time, but a limitation of budget. So you didn't have the ability to do multiple takes. And again, I point back to we talked about when we were discussing last holiday, how some of the dead giveaways of a lower budget were things like the crowd scenes just looked so empty, that spaces didn't really seem large enough for what they were supposed to be. You look at the crowd scenes on here, you would think there were thousands and thousands of people in that crowd. There weren't. That's Richard Lester using Hollywood magic. I'm sorry, Pine Studios magic. You look at the dance sequence when they go out and the "I Want to Be Your Man" sequence when they're dancing at the club. You would think that was a club absolutely filled with people, and so whereas some directors could take a crowd of 1,000 and make it look like 12 people. Richard Lester can take 12 people and make it look like a crowd of 1,000.
On a technical, you were saying about the cameras before. I was just curious what was the role in those cameras? Like, what was it, 10 minutes or how long typically? And I'm also curious, like, were they using some sort of new cameras that were more portable or something? Because it seems
They did have, yeah, they had Panaflex cameras. They actually were nailing them to the Airflex uh, monitors, so that they could get that mobility with it, and then they would put it on a set of 2x4s, and so the longer the 2x4s were, the more stability that you had. And two people would actually carry it on a 2x4, and the actual cinematographer would have to actually run up after it, looking at the monitor, which was slightly enlarged because they had nailed it on top of it, but it was maybe 4 or 5 times the size of a viewfinder. It was an incredible feat to pull off.
yeah, it does because so many close-up shots and the lighting is almost perfect, which means either they, I guess maybe that might have been the set itself, but like they would have had to push the film, I guess, to get that so consistent. But there's so many shots where there's long shots, crazy, really wide shots, and then super close-up shots, like all mixed together.
And that's the magic of having the multiple camera setup, because because you don't have to take the lights down, put them back up for a close up, because you've got both cameras, and then you can take light readings for both, or in this case, in the case of the ending, 6 cameras, and you can take light readings for each one of them and make it look perfectly lit at all times. Also, because you're in black and white, you don't have to worry about contrasting colors when you cut from a wide shot to a close up, which is kind of what I think makes this feel less dated than a Help or a Magical Mystery Tour or films like that.
And also the unconventional kind of camera angles, that swish pans, the crash zooms, the crowd scenes, the slow motions. The handheld camera like adds to that frantic of the fans. And I don't know, but Eric, of course, about that scene that I was asking previously, that how did they take that 360-degree around Paul? Like they
I, I,
use.
I do not. Jesse,
Oh,
please, please,
sure, 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 sure,
you,
sure.
you,
So
you, you,
that's
you must
very
edify us.
interesting. That's very interesting. So they use a like a kid's swing. They use the swing and put the cameraman and the camera on the swing, hanging from the ceiling, and they go around, on the swing, because they couldn't afford the cranes. And that's how they create that 360-degree around Paul. And that's why, like, what is it called, the kind of
Now, was
contrast,
that with the
the
full size
like.
camera, or was that with the Aeroflex?
No, that was with the full size camera. That's the point. So that was the whole problem with that. So they couldn't, and that's why, like,
So he couldn't
it's
he
shaky.
couldn't hand hold it the way that he could with the Aeroflex. Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so it becomes shaky. And but what happens that I really like is that when they showed that image to Walter Shanson, it says, like, they said that, it's shaky. There are some composition mistakes in it. He says it's no problem because it adds to the artistry of this film. And and so many other, if you like go to IMDb and stuff, and you see like how, like, people find so many kind of continuity problems. And oh, they have a hat in that scene, and on the next scene they don't have the hat. But they forget that they all adds to this surrealism aspect of this film. This and I think that that's so beautiful. And one more thing that I really want to talk about is the movie poster, because it's also an I don't know, Vern, if you have seen it, because I think that's something that you can talk about also. If you can't remember, just Google it. It's also the album cover, and why I think it's so important. It's because it's the final credit of the movie. Because right now, when you see, Marvel uses these tricks that they put these clips at the end of the credits so that people sit through the whole, credit. And I really don't understand that, why there is like ending credit is part of the film. Like, have respect and sit through it. So, and how it's done in this film with those tiny shots that they put on the album cover, I think it's so beautiful. And it's so, you know, and we see them together, these people, and we see their different angles. We see them from the back, their goofy aspect, their serious face, they're making faces. It's so beautiful. What a beautiful way to end this movie, and to put those images on the album cover. And if anyone else wants to talk about that, I really want to know what you guys think about it.
Well, I did have one more of the trivia points before we get back to the album cover that I kind of wanted some clarity on because I've heard two stories about this. Now, it's said that the little boy watching them on television is Phil Collins, who, of course, everyone knows from Genesis, who produced a series of great albums in the early 1970s up until The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And then I don't know what they did after that. Sila, did they get famous after that? I know Peter Gabriel left. And anyway, who knows? But I've also heard that he was actually in a crowd scene of a scene that got cut out of the film, and I don't know which one is true.
I
And
tell you, it's in the documentary that I put in the chat. The documentary that I put in the chat is about making this movie. The narrator is Phil Collins. So Phil Collins tells the making of uh Hard Day's Night, and he also tells like that he played that little boy in the movie.
good clarity. I love clarity almost as much as I love the Beatles. All right, going back to the movie poster. It is interesting because they went through 9 different movie posters before they found one that satisfied them. Because initially they had kind of animated versions of just the Beatles with real versions of their haircuts, and that wasn't going to work. It just kind of looked. It made the film look as cheap as it was made for. And then they had one with the that was just the shot from the film of them uh, singing on stage. I can't remember which song it was, and that turned out rather blurry. And it's actually only an accident that they ended up with the one that they did, because the film had to be in theaters within a week, and they were just like, okay, that one.
So, okay, one more thing. Eric, what do you call that haircut? What do you call your haircut? The
A
question
mop
is.
top. Arthur. Arthur.
So, okay,
No,
Got me
you're
going
on
back
that
to
correct.
one.
That's
music,
correct. That's
Sila,
correct.
yeah, Sila and Jace,
Page boy, right?
everybody.
Page boy cut.
So-
Sorry, I was just saying. I think it's a page boy, right? The cut of the. Is that what you're talking about?
It's a joke from the movie.
No,
Yeah, it is Arthur. That's the name in the movie. It's called Arthur, according to him.
That's in the press conference scene. They said, "What do you call that a haircut?" And he points at his head, and he says, "It's George Harrison." He says,
Right.
"Arthur."
Sorry.
Do you have a pet? Does anyone have a pet? Oh my, that press conference scene kind of reminded me of Bob Dylan, like the way that he deals always with the press, Mr. Jones and stuff. But yes, I love that. Those dialogues, they're amazing. The dialogue, okay, a few scenes in the film that I really like to talk about. But before that, Sila, if you want to add anything else about the music, which number was your favorite? Everybody, like, uh, which song in the film was your favorite? Which of the numbers is your favorite? Talk about that because that's what all this is about. Before we go to, I want to talk
And
about a
and
few
anyone
important
in the
scenes.
audience, just raise your hand,
Of course,
and
of
we'll let you up
course.
on stage if you have some Beatle media you want to discuss.
And
Well,
if
I'm
anyone been to a Beatles concert, please come and share that with us.
I remember one, but I cannot remember the title of it. That was my favorite song in the movie. But from the Beatles, one escapes me. I would say I have three favorite songs by the Beatles. One is "There Is a Place." I love that song. Oh Darling. It's another song that I really like from them. And there's a third one, which is very unpopular, but I think is an excellent composition. So if I think of it, I will let you know.
I was really gonna hope you said Rocky Raccoon, but that's another.
Nobody says Rocky Raccoon. I think my favorite was Across the Universe, but I'm a Pink Floyd fan, and if you've listened to Pink Floyd, that was obviously the most influential song because Echoes is just basically a remake of it. Run Like Hell is basically just a remake of it. I mean, they went back. Shine On You Crazy Diamond is just without Across the Universe, you'd have no Pink Floyd.
Don't you like the scene that the first time that we see, I think going back to what Jason was saying, that how much we see from this movie later in their career. I think that scene that John walk the first time that they're starting to play on the stage, when John walks to Ringo, when they're saying that, oh, Ringo is, has his attitudes with the drums, like he's picky, he wanted his, and they walk to him and they kind of circle him and kind of comfort him to, to start playing. And I thought that, oh, okay, this is where a little help from my friends coming from, like Ringo's song. And one more thing that I found really interesting in the film is that we see George and Ringo go on a, solo mission of sort. That they're most of the time they're considered like the quiet ones or the ones in the back. But in this film, we get, they get their narratives. They get their own story. George, and it's very important. Like Ringo has like that moment of revelation that he goes on his trip, to find himself. That I think that's very fascinating. Like I don't know if you guys know, like what book he's reading and how it's related to the movie, and also like where George goes. I think that's so important. What do you think about these scenes? Like each of these characters kind of character arc in the film.
Well, interestingly, George just joined the band probably about the same time they were filming this. Not much, maybe a year before. I mean, I think he joined in end of '62, so it would have been like pretty fresh in the band. Sorry, not George. I meant Ringo. Yeah, sorry.
I think mostly from the part of Lester as the person who, if I understand correctly, he is the one who has the concept in his head and on paper. The Beatles, I'm I'm assuming that they're not really putting that much input into how the film will be presented, the flow, how they will be presented as individuals or as groups. I think Lester might have been the one in charge because he's the director. And to that question, I think in the head of Lester, he's really trying. Of course, it probably became later on a known fact that McCartney and Lennon were the songwriters, at least the main ones. Most songs are theirs. But even if they would have gotten another drummer or another person instead of Harrison, the chemistry that they had was needed for this piece. It might have worked with other people, but I think the Beatles phenomena is what it is because of this particular four individuals and the way they worked with each other and the way they were with each other, at least to the extent that I see it on this film, if that's true. And when Ringo Starr goes away, like I said before, with the photography, taking pictures, and then one of them, I think, I don't know, I don't remember who that was, who threw a rock on the lake and got hit by the tire. So Lester, in my opinion, is trying to give this layer of who, not in terms of philosophy or psychology, but who are these individuals who are part of this group. And I don't know how realistic that would be to each of them, but at least we got an impression of, well, this one has this funny side, and this one has this boyish character to him, and it was not really part of the story, but it was kind of the story in terms of little details as to what happens not outside of music, but that music happens in part because they are who they are individually.
Anatomy of a Murder, by the way, is the novel that he was reading, which was made into actually a really good film with Jimmy Stewart, directed by Otto Preminger, and was set in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I grew up in Michigan. But interesting that you mentioned the Ringo sequence, but the other sequence that I think sticks out is, of course, the George Harrison sequence, where they're kind of drafting him for an opinion on shirts, and that's where the word "grotty" got invented, which was claimed to be Liverpool slang, but it's pretty much acknowledged that Alan Owen just had invented it when he says the shirts are grotty, and they're sorry about the shirts, and they're talking about the model that's supposed to be the spokesman for the teens, and he's talking about turning the volume down so that they could make fun of him, make fun of her. There's no scenes like that for Paul or John.
Correct. But in that particular scene that you just mentioned, I was questioning if they know who he is, or they're
Yeah, no,
unaware of the fact
no
that
one
he's.
over 30
They,
knows who the Beatles is. That's the running joke of
oh,
this.
okay. Oh,
That's
okay.
the running joke of this film. The only one who really acknowledges him, who's in any authority, is when Paul's grandfather is at the gambling party, and the doorman lets him in, and the reason for that is, of course, that Ringo actually had an invitation to that particular party. But yeah, that's the running joke. No one over 30 seems to know who these people are, and under 30 they're the be all and end all. But
And
I have an answer to that. Oh, go ahead.
no, no,
Yes.
no. I want to hear your answer. Actually, that's what I want.
I think that Lester had said that Paul just tried too hard, and if you look at the little cutaway scene of him playing with his hands and what have you, I think Paul and John just really weren't as good on screen as Ringo and George were. And so I actually truly believe that. I think they were just much more natural, much easier to work with, where people who are narrow geniuses, who like John and Paul are, who one of the greatest songwriting duos in history, perhaps uh, you know are not going to be as open minded about how how you perform and in front of a camera and taking direction, and that's why I think those scenes were actually written for Ringo and George instead, because they just would have appeared much more naturally on screen. But I did want to take a moment to welcome Jay Edward to the stage. Jay Edward, we've seen you in the audience before, but it's the first time we've seen you on stage, and thank you for stopping by.
Hello, guys.
Have you seen A Hard Day's Night, and do you have any thoughts on it?
Honestly, I can remember. I'm sorry. Just listening to you guys.
Very good answer. Good answer.
So okay, now that he doesn't remember, I have a question about anatomy of a murder and that kind of meta textual kind of the way that they use that for Ringo. Actually, I think that also a very subtle comedic aspect. That like quirky, unexpected, uh, humor and wit that comes from each of these characters throughout the film. Because, I think that uh, we always imagine Ringo as the guy, as I said, like the guy in the quiet one in the back. And then suddenly, with the influence of the clean grandpa, suddenly, and like by reading this book, which like this book about this courtroom book, that series that creates this rebel inside this guy, that moral and it all because one of the themes in the book is and the movie is kind of this moral ambiguity, and the way that by reading that and you know the good impression of the grandpa, he suddenly decides to go on this journey and rebel and finds himself as I think it's so comedic, even though the whole scene is so the way that it's you know
Well,
filmed and it's
I'd like to
shown,
tie
it's
that.
so
I'd like to tie
poetic.
that to an earlier scene with John Lennon, where he runs into the woman who doesn't quite remember who he is, but realizes he's famous, and she says, "Aren't you?" And he says, "No, I couldn't be." And said, "You look just like." And he says, "No." His eyes are different or whatever. And, oh, you're right. And the scene ends with him saying, "Yeah, she looks more like him than I do." And the two scenes really reminded me of something that had ever since Wittgenstein decided he was going to take up residency in England had become a staple of a lot of these films that we talk about, whether we're talking about the Ealing comedies, whether we were, whether we were talking about even the King Lear, it came up, which is, this influence, of Beckett-esque theater of the cruel and the absurd, and this hostility almost toward language that shows up in the English consciousness. And I, of course, have always rooted that back to the influence of Wittgenstein on the literate class at that point, that words just don't mean what they actually mean, and that language is just too complex and too layered to be able to actually provide meaning. And so, you can learn from books, and now you should be out parading, and and he's able to, Paul's grandfather is able to twist Ringo's thoughts with just a few words. Similar, and I think that ties back to the scene with John and the woman who recognizes him but doesn't recognize him, and how the words turn everything around. Oh, no, I can't be him. Oh, well, and they never mention who he is. They play what's called what Wittgenstein used to call the name game. Who, where, when, what, and it's just, well, spit it out. What's the guy's name? And I think script wise, this is a very English film in that way.
Oh, actually, I have a lot of like that in the vernacular department, linguistic questions that I wanted to ask, but I leave that for later. Now, going back to because I think that's a very important scene. One, I want to talk about the John Lennon in the bathtub, the way that he disappears, and George, like when he goes to this trendy producer. So I think, the setting of the office atmosphere You know, it's modern, and they're trying to give him those shirts to wear, that kind of superficial image of the uh, producers of fashion, of advertisement, the way that they say that this whole production of this film is exploitation of these four young talented men, you know. And the way that he mistakenly brought to this place, I think it's funny. It's the humor of that misunderstanding and the comedic aspect, and his interaction, like going back to what Eric you were saying, that the language, that kind of, they understand each other, and at the same time they don't understand each other, that misunderstanding through the same language, I think, again, that
Well, what does Ringo shout after the police officer when he's out in the street? You remember?
yeah, that's what I asked. I say, what do they call, they
Southern
called it?
Southerner. He says
Oh,
Southerner because
oh,
Yes, correct.
he's from
Yes.
Liverpool. The word Southerner is an insult. Just where you live, Southerner. Well, you know, you're the visitor. You're the one. You're the Liverpudlian. You know, you're the one from up north.
Again, this dissecting of the different layers of within the country, which I thought was in the movie all the time.
Absolutely, from the
oh,
opening sequence.
absolutely.
The fellow in the opening scene, who closes the window and won't let them listen to the radio. Why do you
Yes,
think?
yes.
Why does he automatically assume that these? It's not because of their age. Why does he automatically assume that these people are in the wrong coach? Because of their accents, because they're Liverpudlians, because they don't have, one of the funniest stories, and I'm going to tell it because I keep getting the same person keeps writing me saying that we say fuck too many times on this show, and I just actually love it. So watch your goddamn language, you motherfuckers. But they wanted to redub the film with transatlantic accents. United Artists did after it was delivered to the United States, and Richard Lester refused. And Paul McCartney said, "If we've got to listen to a bunch of fucking Texans in your westerns, I don't understand why you guys can't put up with our Liverpudlian accent." That's an exact quote. You know.
So I have a question. Who is the guy who plays this trendy producer? Because I know that that lady Anna Quayle, I know her, but this guy, I don't know him. But I'm pretty sure that, like, I don't know, or maybe he's nobody. I don't know. But I think that at that George scene, this shows this aspect of this anti-establishment aspect of the Beatles, this rebellious aspect, that counterculture aspect, nonconformist aspect, and the way that they interact with authority figures, from the beginning scene to the train scene to the police and security scene, and the television studio. I think that's very well done, and that's also a part of this absurd comedy and the wit of the film.
There's this. I don't know if you're talking about the TV producer, the guy that was a little bit, a little bit snobbish. When they, when one of them says, "I'm sure his wife knitted his sweater," and somebody responds, "I think she knitted him."
Yeah, and one thing that I'm going to use from now on is
Well,
the saying that,
real quick, that was Victor Spaghetti, who played the TV director. Victor Spinetti was the guy's name, and he. If you watch any British television, he's the he's the Welsh equivalent of Jason Bateman, because he was just in everything, and he plays that same kind of Jason Bateman role on British television. The guy who just kind of knows too much and is too smart for his own good.
Yeah, and what happens here kind of, later it happens in history, like with Jim Morrison and the way that is going to sing "Light My Fire" and all that. So, but the phrase that I'm going to use, just like the knitting, is that when after they play and they come back to the backstage, when they're wearing John is wearing that fake beard and the wig, and oh my goodness, first of all, that joke that you are intentionally taller than me is hilarious. I laugh at it every time. But then he says, like John says, he's flirting with one of those, can dancers, and he says, like, she was going to show me her stamp collection. So I said, yeah, I'm going to use that from now on. Like, we're going to see each other's stamp collection. So yeah, the movie, throughout the movie, is full of these like beautiful, witty, uh, you know, brash kind of reactions and comedic sentences and phrases. I really don't know why you know, they. You're right, Eric. They kind of some part of this movie is kind of forgotten, and I don't know why. Like, because the script needed
Well, I wouldn't
more
say forgotten,
attention.
but I think underrated. I don't think, like I said, it's number 89 on that BFI list. And, I've seen as many British films as pretty much any. I mean, I run a room called UK Cinema History. Uh, and the idea that there were 89 or 88 films that were better than this made out of Britain, that's what I mean. I think it's underrated.
I'm curious about the rest of you. I noticed one mistake in the film, a drastic, very clear mistake, and I'm wondering if anybody saw it or if anybody.
Is it the turtleneck sweater?
No,
It's
no,
okay. Then
no.
because I noticed hundreds of mistakes, but that was the biggest one to me. What
So
was the biggest one?
for me, for me that's the only one. That's the only one I saw. When we see, I think it's Ringo Starr, once he goes on his own because of McCartney tells him you should not be reading the book, just go out and live your life. And he becomes a gentleman, throwing his coat on the puddle for the woman who's going to cross over, and keeps taking his coat and so she doesn't get wet. And then she falls into this manhole or this hole, and somebody brings her back up, but her white coat is white. That is not possible.
I'm going to be echoing here for just a moment, so I'm sorry about the sound quality. Yeah, no, early in the film, when they sneak through the one car to get into the other, John Lennon is wearing a normal suit, and when they get into the car, he's wearing a black turtleneck. Uh,
Yeah, I
there's
think. Yeah. I was gonna say, I think this all lends to the intention of the absurdism to show that, like, what you think you know is not what you know.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's
I
possible.
was going to I was going to point that out. The other scene would be where the Beatles seem to be running along outside the train, that asking the old man for for their ball back.
Which brings us to that
Well, yeah, that was a
famous,
little bit crazy.
yeah, that famous bathtub scene. But before, have you noticed that we don't hear the word Beatles in the film? No one calls them Beatles. We don't hear it. We just see it in a few places written, like written in their helicopter or on the package that they receive. But no one calls them a band, like together. What do you think of that? You think that's
That's very
intentional?
interesting. That's very interesting.
Well, what if they were just a flash in the pan? They still wanted to be able to market the movie and the soundtrack.
Or don't you think just because I think Alan Watts the script was very that's a smart script. I think there should be a reason to, because they have their own names. We hear they've been called a lot, but separately. Is it because like the movie does not want to focus on the band because they were afraid that they, for the marketing aspect of it, because they weren't sure if they stay together as a band just because they were so young, and all these things about the bands, like what happened to
No,
them later.
I think it's because of the word Beatles was so synonymous with it with it that it wasn't worth mentioning. You wouldn't say the Beatles are here. You would say the band is here because
Well,
what other band would you be talking about?
yeah,
That's going to be playing on your show.
Oh.
yeah, but they had an opportunity at least once or twice when they're playing in the studio and the guy with the knitted sweater is waiting for them to come. In two occasions, he puts them on the stage, and that would have been the moment to say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles." So they had opportunities to use the presentation of the band, but they never did it.
So maybe, because I thought that maybe it's because the movie's focus, just like what we were just talking about, it focuses on the individual, not on the band. Am I reading too much into this?
Perhaps a tiny bit, yes, perhaps.
So, okay, before
Well,
we
you're
wrap
right though.
up,
That they don't mention the name of the band.
But it's interesting though, like thinking about the poster and thinking about the album and all these things being synchronous. Is like, was this probably the first time somebody started thinking about a press release or a package, release of like a film, a group of people, and the sort of album and the posters and probably all the other things people were buying and selling for that exact release and their first launch in America.
It could also be a matter of rights, that they did not give the rights to Lester to do that.
well, I thought that because at some point on the script, one of the theme is like it focuses on their vulnerability as individuals. Just like what I said at the beginning of the room, that the only time that we see them happy and smiling and liberated uh, indoor beside that, that the moment of outbreak is when they're together as a group playing music. So that emotional depth of being called the Beatles and together, you know and there is no frustration or exhaustion or vulnerability. But when they are alone, when George is alone, when with that guy, when Ringo's alone on his own, that I think the group dynamic versus the individual dynamic, I think that was one of the things that occurred to me when I was, because
Well,
this
and one of
time
the
I
things I
thought,
like about this film and did not like about Help is that you actually get an idea of the Beatles together as a group, whereas Help, they kind of imposed that whole story about the spy story and the trying to get the ring and the sacrifice and all of that on it. And it seemed more like the Beatles were extras in that, whereas this is just about the Beatles, you know, and it's just about and the enjoyment you get from the Beatles here. It's not about a bunch of other things. Uh, quite honestly, in Help, I can't think of a subplot that didn't have something to do with getting the ring off of Ringo's finger that involved any of the members of the band. Most of the subplots were all about the people who were chasing them, and the Leo McKern and all of that. I think, but I think this is a much more focused film in that way.
There's another side note that I see coming up in other productions, like Monty Python likes doing that a lot, where the British like to put an eye in the put a finger in the eye of the Germans, and when he decides to go on parading, as he says when he walks out and leaves the book on the table. I don't know if he takes it with him, but when he walks out, he sees a table with Germans and he gives a Heil Hitler. That's typical British against the Germans.
Well, and against the man, really, this is filled with those little pokes in the eye. When John Lennon is lecturing about the sexual depravity among the oldsters and how the oldsters are going to lead us all to decay, this was less than a year after the Profumo scandal. That involved prostitutes and adultery had caused the Conservative government of England to collapse, and so that would have actually spoken to a lot of people. I mean, there's just a lot of the pokes in the eye. You mentioned Monty Python, and there's a lot of that, and I think they picked that up from the Goons, which obviously Richard Lester had done a lot of work with, he would later make a film called The Bed Sitting Room, which I guess I'm the only person who loves that movie because it's got incredibly low ratings on all of the Rotten Tomatoes and places like that, but which was based on a play by Spike Milligan that is all just poking a thumb in the eye of authority. But it's all the way through this. I fought in World War II. Well, I bet you're sad that we won. Well, that's got a double meaning. Number one, because he's saying for lads like you. But there's also like the double meaning is saying, well, I bet you wish the Nazis had won. I mean, it's all the way through this film.
Yeah, there's a bunch of that also. I mean, The Bed Sitting Room is a great film. I do appreciate it, and definitely it's a precursor to Monty Python in like many ways on those skits. But it's interesting thinking. I was just thinking about The Magic Christian. I don't know if you guys saw that. It's from 1969. But Ringo is the son of Peter Sellers, and it's just a farce. But it has a lot of throwbacks to this as well. Like there's a scene on the train that just gets completely absurd, and
Yeah, I think it's more of a dumber. That's a dumber Hard Day's Night. That was if the Hard Day's Night was written by a screenplay writer who didn't quite have the same ear for dialogue.
yeah, I
That's
mean, it
how
was
I
written by
always.
funny enough that was written by
But I love that movie.
Terry Southern and Peter Sellers together, and Terry Southern was writing with Kubrick at the same time on Strangelove and I think Clockwork Orange as well. So like, yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, it's a parody, but it's it does have a lot of throwbacks specifically to this movie.
Well, I didn't mean that as a pejorative. I'm sorry. And I think and I actually think that's a good film as well. I'm glad to hear somebody else likes The Bed Sitting Room. It was actually my suggestion for this, but Yazzie chose this on her birthday, and I wasn't going to ever say no to Yazzie on her birthday. Not that I can say no to Yazzie anyway. And I think we picked the better film, quite honestly. I hadn't rewatched this in several years, and I'm glad we chose this one because not only is it more historically important, it is just in general the better film. But I do want to shout out for people who can find a copy of The Bed Sitting Room. It's got Ralph Richardson's in it. Like I say, it's based on a play by Spike Milligan. Really, and if you enjoy the kind of direction that Richard Lester does here and in his Three Musketeers films, and if you enjoy the kind of humor of the knack and how to get it, I think The Best Bed Sitting Room is the purest you're going to find. That's Richard Lester at his Richard Lesteriest.
And it's almost like kind of the same as Pete and Dud as well, with them at their sort of Pete and Dudniest, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the film that they did that had all the big co-stars where They with I think Michael Crawford was in it, and gosh,
I mean, they
can't
did
remember.
Bedazzled, which was also a really epic, sort of fun one, the original.
Yeah, the Bedazzled was a good is a good example too. Although again, I don't think that's good enough for this room, but definitely worth a rewatch. Not the remake with Brendan Fraser
No,
though.
no, not at all.
Well, Yazzie, this is your.
Which one? What?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the one I wanted to say, like the way that you know that sort of uh the way that they portrayed John as the leader, kind of his sarcastic quick wit through that bathtub scene that he disappears, that he torpedoes himself, as George describes it. It's brilliant. And the surrealism and the playfulness of that scene, and the way that he himself, that nonchalant kind of attitude toward his disappearance is, in a very short scene, but describes his character. I think that's brilliant. That's a very remarkable scene in the movie.
Jason, you on mic, so go ahead, and then I.
Oh no, sorry, I meant to mic. Actually, I think I reversed my mic. That's all. Sorry.
Yeah, let's take a look at that scene for a moment because it's a scene with a lot of brilliant directorial touches. Because you think of how much is going on in that scene. Because of course you also have George teaching what's his name, the assistant to the manager, the taller one, to shave. And he's putting the lather. He said he won't do it on his face. So he puts the lather on the mirror. Now you think about, and you've got John doing the bathtub routine all in one shot with three cameras, but all three cameras are doing one shots, and they're filming all of this at the same time. But think about the precision that you have to have for a scene like that. So he's putting the shaving cream so it looks like it's going over not Norm but his assistant's face, right? But if you think about it, from the angle that he's at and he's looking into a mirror, he can't actually use what he sees as his face that he's putting it around. He has to put it where the camera, which is going to be at a different angle, would see his face. And so, uh, uh, but you also have to be able to see John in the bathtub in that mirror, and I mean it's a very complicated scene. And if a small budget film came out with a scene like that today, people would be talking about what a technical marvel it is, and it is a technically marvelous scene.
I did notice that with the angle. I was very surprised to see that the placing of the shaving cream was in the right spot to cover his face, but the angle did not seem right. And I found that very interesting.
Yeah, because the camera has to be able to pick it up as if it was from George's point of view, and still have George in the shot, and not have the camera be in the mirror. I mean, think about it. I mean, that just the complexity of it. Like to even try to write a scene like that down. You go to film it and you might go, just isn't going to work. Let's scrap it because quite honestly, But that just shows the level of technical achievement of the people who made this, especially considering it was on such a low budget. Now, Yazzie, I've got to say this because I'm going to have
Yeah,
to leave
I know.
pretty soon.
Yeah, so the last thing I want to say about that scene is that the disappearing act, to me, it was kind of like a metaphor for this elusive nature of fame and identity that is one of the main theme of the whole film. Like, despite their enormous popularity, and this it remain enigmatic and playful, and the fans, they never or the media, they never fully uh, understand these characters, and they're not accessible to the fans or to the member of the press as themselves. I think that uh also that escapism, that need to disappear from the eyes, also was very well on that, just in that very you know short, little, complex scene that kind of encapsulate the whole themes of the film. And that's what I meant by, that's why this movie needed Lester. That's why we need this directorial vision to create, you know a Hallmark movie like this. Sometimes only the genius of the Beatles weren't enough. you know and again, I think the way that this film created the persona for these people, that the Beatles that we know today are the Beatles that we see in this film. I think that's the brilliance of this film. They create themselves, and with this director, with this you know production, with everything happened time wise, very you know very everything comes together at the right time, at the right age, and with the right technique, and with the right style. So that's the last thing I want to say about this film before we wrap it up. So everyone say your final things.
Well, also, if you've got anything that you want to plug, because this is going out on our podcast on Spotify, and hopefully Apple will get their crap together and have our newer episodes on, because
Oh,
our last episode
so
hadn't
yeah,
appeared there yet.
next week is again one of my most favorite movies, uh the long distance runner, and that real cinema movement, that I really don't like to use the term kitchen sink, because I think free cinema is what they were and what they are. And those movies were brilliant with their budget, the themes that they bring, and their directorial genius and talent, and the use of music and everything. But one more thing about this movie is, this absurdity and irony of celebrity life, and this fame as a double-edged sword, and the way that this movie makes this bridge as this generational bridge through music. Like, music connects us. Even the grandpa, he wants them to go and play that last song, so he does everything just to bring the band together to play, because even for him, that portrays as this reminder of the generational difference. He wants the music to play, so that music brings the generations together and heals, and you know and you know through their music we find their true identity, the way their uh music as you know their coping mechanism, as the only time that there is no kind of mocking, there is no humor, there is no satire. It's them, it's their real selves, is the moment that they're playing music, and that's so beautiful, I think. So next week we're doing the long distance runner, Tony Richardson.
The
That also
loneliness
contains
of
a lot
the
of
loneliness
the
of a long
loneliness of
distance.
long distance runner. So yeah, and please join us, watch these classics. They have a lot, and yeah, they bring a lot of conversations. That's what I always say. Like, they're not just classical movies. They bring a lot. They, especially these movies that are made at this certain historic moments, they they tell history. And this is the real history. You can see people, the way that they react to art, That's the real history to me. So if you want to know what people were doing, were they happy? Were they sad? The theme of angry men after war, and the the hippie movement in the 60s in this film, that need to break free that we see in this film, you know, that's like what we're saying, that why young girls were screaming and they reacted like that. I think that answers to that, because that was the necessity of time at that moment. That's what people needed, that escapism. And yeah, these four young musicians did something that politicians couldn't do. They brought that freedom and that liberation to people, to the next generation. They built the bridge. Finally, they healed the wounds of war. So I think we can compare, like, how cinema changes, how perspective changes. So yeah, watch these movies, come talk to us. That's it. So I pass the mic, and thank you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Sila. Thank you, Eric. And everyone who listened to us.
Yeah, thank you everyone. This was fun. That movie's on YouTube, by
Where,
the way. The next one for next week. I just noticed it's the full movie's on YouTube.
yeah, it's actually a pretty good copy. Yassi, where can people find you online?
Here, they can find me here. Come talk to us on Clubhouse every week. Yeah, and Twitter, Soufi Yassi. You can find me there also.
Sila, final thoughts? Anything you want to plug and where people can find you online?
Well, I'll just mention maybe three music movies. Bohemian Rhapsody, not Stop Making Sense from Talking Heads, and The Wall by Pink Floyd. Those are three true music films, but none of them do what Lester did with this film, to bring out the simplicity of each player and the way they work with each other, and the the funny aspects when they're on their own. And I think that was a very, very special way of addressing musicians. In Bohemian Rhapsody, we hear perhaps mostly information about Freddie Mercury because of his situation and because of his role. But in this film, I find they're almost equal in terms of how much we get to know about the details of the person behind each instrument. And I just find this Lester did a very good job with this particular type of music film. I was lovingly, my arm was lovingly twisted by Yassi, so I think I will be opening a after party kind of thing, something I never do, but maybe in about an hour, around 8, I'll open a room just enjoying some of the music of the Beatles. And tomorrow, in 1882, tomorrow was the premiere of Parsifal, one of the biggest and most bombastic operas of Richard Wagner. So I will be doing that at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. So you have, I think, 4 hours. If you come late, you still get 3 hours of music. So that's all I would say. And thank you very much for making me watch yet another fantastic movie.
What's your website, Sila?
Sila Blume Life. Very simple. Very difficult, but very simple.
Jason, you get the last word on A Hard Day's Night. And also, if you've got any projects you want to plug, now would be the time. And if you want people to find you online.
I I don't really have much to say in closing. If you want to find me online, it's most of the links are in my bio for that.
Well, that doesn't help
Yeah, that's
people
about.
who are listening on the podcast.
Yeah. Okay. It's I think on Instagram it's Jason underscore Miranda and I'm sorry, J Miranda, and then Twitter it's Jason underscore Miranda, Miranda.
Any final thoughts on A Hard Day's Night?
No, I think we're good. Yeah. I'm thinking as for music films, it's again something like The Wall is obviously a favorite.
Well,
Just that Richard Lester, Eric, say that he made our favorite Robin Hood movie.
yes, Robin and Marion. Yes, Sean Connery. Oh gosh, yes, great film. We'll have to do it in the room sometime. Mark Redfield. We got to get him for that one. I'm sure he knew Audrey Hepburn personally or something.
Yeah, but Purple Rain kind of that's a movie that I think that movie did kind of fair to Prince, because he, just like this movie, they had the freedom, the creative freedom of the musician and the cast and crew together. I think that could be a good example if someone wants to pair something with this movie. Purple Rain could be a good pairing watch.
Well, another thing about this movie is that, at least as the Beatles, they were doing other things before that, but at least as the Beatles, this group was in existence only 4 years to show this powerful movie. When we think of many of the Prince, David Bowie, Bohemian Rhapsody, Pink Floyd, those were all a very different story. They were already super famous. They were probably just Bohemian Rhapsody. Freddie Mercury was already dead. So this is a very particular film because it does what it does when they're actually barely starting. They were already famous, but they were actually only 4 years making music, and they developed a lot. They did a lot of different things after that. So this film, from presenting such a powerful group, it was nevertheless a very, very young group.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because even the Who with Tommy, very mature, and Quadrophenia, mature bands, mature works. This is catching them in their youth. That's an excellent point. I do want to start closing this room out, but I do want to also congratulate myself on the fact that Yassi went the entire episode without mentioning Star Wars or David Fincher once. I consider that a personal triumph. I am rubbing off on you, Yazzie. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad one. Again, next week's film is A Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner, which was another one of Yazzie's selections. It was my idea, however, to have these two films back to back and to have the third film be I'm All Right, Jack, because I really want these three films to be seen in comparison. So, because this is a film room about UK cinema history and to show how this style of filmmaking, and yes, it is applied to a kind of a dramatic Alan Sillitoe novel, or short story in Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner, but there are a lot of moments of high comedy in that as well, and the same kind of filmmaking style that the Bolton brothers also used with Peter Sellers in I'm All Right, Jack. I think these three films pair very, very well in terms of UK cinema history. So I really hope to have you all here for the next 3 weeks. Sila and Yazzie, there's no choice. I will haunt you if you aren't here. But Jason, we'd love to have you for for those two episodes as well. Um, but other than that, my real final thought on A Hard Day's Night is that if you haven't seen this film in several years or watched it on an old VHS, watch it again and watch the Criterion restoration with a better sound. And you'll find I think it is a lot better film today than it probably was when you saw it the last time. And other than that, I'm going to I want to thank Sila, Yazzie, Jason, and in the audience, Michelle, Kathy, who's been to pretty much every one of our episodes, and we love you, Kathy. And then I never know how to pronounce her name, but Shangamir, am I getting that right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Okay, no. Uh, but
Here,
uh,
hi.
uh, she runs a jazz room here on Clubhouse that's extremely popular on Sundays. The new jazz listener, and we love we're honored to have her here, and she's a very valuable asset to our community. And thank you for coming. Kathy is always been a great supporter, and Michelle has been here for the last month. So we actually, it is a lot easier to do this when we have an audience, when we have people that we know we're speaking to, than talking to ourselves. And so you all are just as important as the people who decide that they're going to take the stage. And so thank you. And other than that, unless anybody's got anything else, I'm going to start. I'm going to close this room in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good night, everybody. We'll see you next Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for the loneliness of a long distance runner. Thanks again.